Hello, Namaskara, good morning, and welcome to BIC Streams. Today's session is Here a Screen, There a Screen, and everywhere a screen screen. This is the third episode in our Young Adults series anchored by 17 to 22-year-olds for all ages. After successfully having convinced the older generation in the first episode that they are indeed old enough, and then talking about youth in activism, in this episode they will be talking about screens, its usage, importance, role in daily lives, and much more. What do these young adults have to say about their dependence on all kinds of screens? What do they see as the challenges, drawbacks, and advantages? To talk about all this and more, we have with us Akash Vikram Shroff, Parth Behani, Sanjana Karthik, Rashi Kumar, and of course our moderator Sanjit Rao. The short and sweet bios of all the speakers will appear on your chat box, and at any point during the session, if you feel like you would like to make a comment, an observation, or ask a question, please feel free to use the Q&A box. And with that, I hand it over to Sanjit.
Thank you, Lekha, and thank you BIC once again for providing us with this platform in which young adults are included in the discourse and in just holding discussions and trying to make ourselves more understood, which is a very difficult feat to actually achieve because young adults are often the most misunderstood category of people. But I'm confident that through this platform, we are going to achieve some amount of success in this matter. So I think today's topic is really interesting because screens are so ubiquitous in today's world, and it has been for a very long period of time, but with the pandemic has become even more pronounced because of us being confined to our own houses and not being allowed to go outside and actually have face-to-face conversations and meetings. It's quite interesting because I was reading a study which said that the average American spends about 3 hours and 45 minutes a day only on their mobile devices. That's about one-sixth of a day, which is quite a lot if you think about the fact that a good part of it is spent sleeping, and then a good part of it is actually spent on just mobile devices, not even including laptops or desktops. I also read another article in the Washington Post which said that in the first week of lockdown, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, screen time among iPhone users went up by about 33%. And by the account of stories that my own friends have told me, our own screen time, especially for those in my age group, has gone up by 100 to 150%. I remember talking to a couple of my friends in the first few weeks of the pandemic, and they were telling me that they had gone through the screen time tracker on their phones and noticed that they were spending close to 9 to 10 hours a day on screens, which is something which shocked a lot of us. And I must admit that even I was to a certain extent guilty of the same, sleeping for about half the day and then just being stayed glued to a screen for the other half. So I think that this discussion that we're going to be having today is really important because of the context that we're in. And I couldn't be more excited to have it with the given set of panelists. Although the topic is to do with screens, do not worry, we're not going to bore you by only talking about screen time, but we have a whole bunch of topics that we will be covering, ranging from the benefits of the screen time, are there any disadvantages, and a whole bunch of topics that our panelists will now be introducing shortly. Before moving on to our first panelist, let me once again reiterate and remind you of the format for today's talk. Till the end of the hour, we will be holding a discussion, and at the end of the hour, we will be taking questions and which can be directed to either a specific panelist or generally to the panel as a whole. Please do post your questions in the Q&A box because, or you can even send it via chat to all panelists. But please do ensure that you do it quickly anytime starting now because questions will be addressed on a first come, first serve basis, if I can put it that way. Right. So without further ado, over to Rashi for her opening remarks, her thoughts about screens, and to just set the ball rolling. Rashi.
Hi. I'm going to be talking a little bit about, the evolution of screen time and the evolution of our dependence on screens. Given that we're all above 20, we won't do ourselves disservices by saying our actual ages, but above 20 years old, we've all experienced and we've all kind of come up in this era, I'd say, of like, the screens that we grew up with were all very bulky, were all, had to be closely monitored, not very easy to use. I myself wasn't a very avid screen user growing up. I preferred playing outside, but I didn't even know, how to use screens or what the benefit was apart from TV. And so I wanted to basically highlight the how we've basically come up from, like, having to like have controls on our screens and like not really knowing and like being, having to navigate even technology, learning to navigate itself, and to today where like we basically have our entire lives, especially given the pandemic, on a screen, from our work to our school to our social life to basically everything just being on one compact surface even now. um, it's fascinating if you think about it. Do the rest of the panelists have like any like interesting anecdotes and stuff from, like, their own experience with screens growing up that you would want to share?
Um, well, if I can just come in here. Well, I think what you said about screens being really bulky, difficult to use, to closely monitor it, and even monitor that it doesn't overheat and the fan doesn't stop working, that really brought back some memories, to be honest, from my early childhood, if I can call it that. And also your point about screens being not very easy to use, I completely agree with that, because today even my 78-year-old grandmother finally has her own smartphone. She's had one for the past 2 3 years, but I think even 10 15 years ago, trying to convince her to actually use a desktop or a laptop would have been out of the question. But now they're so user friendly that even old people are on screens. So yeah, I mean that's, I think, a very interesting point you've raised.
And
Anyone
that's
else?
fascinating because, like the generation before ours is still so, like, afraid of screens, and the generation after us very much grew up more entrenched in screens and screen usage than we did. So we were the kind of like middle ground. We don't have the mistrust of screens that, our parents or our grandparents do, but we also don't have like the dependence or the need or the urgency to have, like, all of the technology at such a young age, like, the generation after us do. So there's such a, I'd say, synchronicity of, or between where we are from the people before us and the people after us. Akash, Parth, Sanjana.
I also think that a lot of tech companies have now realized the importance of adding different accessibility features to screens. So before, when it was just the screen by itself and you had to control it either using touch or the keypad. But now they've come up with a lot of features for people who have certain disabilities, be it voiceover or changing the screen to have certain contrasts. And that's really helped like a lot of people be able to use screens. And that's only going to keep increasing as time passes.
You make like such a fascinating point because I remember at some point when I was in school and we were, when our introduction to computers through like MS Word and MS Paint and so on and so forth. I remember one of my friends, one of my classmates was blind and she couldn't really use the screen. But like, she they didn't they so she had to like get like an alternative to our computer class to be able to sort of access it. And now you have so many tools and stuff that screens give us, or technology gives us, to be able to ingrain everyone into society and into like technology so much easier.
Right. So great. I think Rashi's really has put things into context, and I think really your opening remarks brought back some memories that I didn't know existed itself. But anyway, moving on, Akash, I think you would like to add something. Please go ahead.
Sure, thank you so much, Sanjit. In general, I find the nature of this panel discussion very important because over the last 3, 4 years, I'd say, and especially over the last year, given the pandemic, the screen has sort of become our primary connection to the outside world. All of us are more attached to it than ever before. And therefore, I think it's very important that we not only get on the same page with regards to the screen, but we also understand what it's doing to us and the possibility for what it could do to us and how we could use it to help ourselves grow. Now, there's this inherent idea that even Rashi mentioned that the generations before us have had, that the screen is in some way harmful to us. And some parts of that are very valid, but I want to introduce the idea that not all screen time is created equally. Sometimes the degree of your usage or the nature of your usage can strongly affect how the screen interacts with us and how our behavior changes with regards to the screen. So, for example, when you have interactive learning or children's education, all of that has been widely boosted by the screen. You're able to have the child be more engaged in studies. More visual learning is allowed through screens. But at the same time, you also have the detriments of screens. So, for example, you have social media and the anxiety that comes with comparing yourselves to other people. You see, because you're comparing your behind the scenes to other people's highlight reels. And so you have that entire struggle that goes on, which is not the best for your mental health. And your screen time is a very, very precious commodity. Your time and moreover your screen time, because you have these billion-dollar operations that are all fighting at one more second of your screen time. They've come up with methods that create this device in your hand into a slot machine, where you're just scrolling to get that is a tool. And therefore, the benefit that you can get from the screen depends entirely on your usage. And so instead of limiting your screen time or saying, I'll only use screens for 1 hour today or only for 2 hours, I think you have to go slightly deeper and understand how you're using it and understand how that's affecting you. And you have to make sure you're not being sucked into these sort of traps that the billion-dollar companies are playing on us. And therefore, these sort of discussions are very vital because you can try to think of other use cases for the screen and you can try to identify where the screen might be negatively impacting you and how you can sort of cut short on that to improve your life effectively.
Right, Akash. I think some great points being brought out in your opening remarks. I have a couple of them noted down. We will circle back to it. But before we do that and try and understand more about what Akash has to say and his thoughts about screen time, the benefits, and how we shouldn't get sucked into this trap, let's first hear from Sanjana. Sanjana, what do you have to say?
Thanks, Sanjit. So I broadly really agree with what Akash was talking about, especially in terms of all screen time not being equal. And I'd like to just explore those ideas and ideas that are tangentially related to that a bit more. So I think that one of the biggest myths, or I think one of the biggest focuses of conversation anytime somebody brings up a screen or the internet is always just the way in which screens or the internet or technology in general impacts us as productive beings, impacts the way in which we spend our time productively, and what we're doing with that screen. And very often this kind of conversation is centered around how screens hamper this kind of productivity rather than aiding it. And as someone who has essentially organized a lot of my life using like productivity apps or just screens in general, especially given the COVID-19 pandemic, I think that something I'd want to hopefully highlight over the course of this panel discussion would be just the ways in which the screen, aside from just making me a productive person, has also helped me grow by giving me access to resources and educational opportunities that I don't think I would have got otherwise. Just in terms of the wealth of knowledge that exists on the internet, along with apps that help you find resources and find communities that help you in your learning journey. I think the screen has really shaped, like played a huge role in shaping the way I learn and also the things that I learn. In addition to that, I just also think another really relevant issue that I hope we get to explore is just the way in which we consume information, because I think that's been drastically changed by using social media and the internet as well, both in terms of the kinds of information that now tends to garner our attention has changed from things like long form, detailed, kind of nuanced discourse to more short, sensationalized Instagram posts or Instagram stories. And I think that that has had a large impact on us, both as individuals, but also culturally in terms of the kinds of information we're now sensitive to and the kinds of information we pay attention to, and then what gets brushed under the carpet or ignored as a consequence of that. So I think that that's another thing that I think people often don't realize is just the way in which screens have impacted our understanding and interaction with the world on a really fine level, by changing every interaction we have, the amount of time we spend on it, the kinds of things we talk about. All of those are, I think, very different face to face, even if the conversation centers around largely the same subjects, just by virtue of having to do extra things to get people's attention when it's on a screen, when your attention is not fully focused. So I think that's another important issue that I think we should discuss, which I think brings me to my final thought on this subject, which is just it's important as young individuals who are essentially navigating the cyberspace to be really aware and cautious while doing so, because along with all of the advantages that come with having unlimited access to resources on the internet and being able to talk to people from all across the world, while that does allow you to make friends from specific communities or really form close relationships with people you haven't even met yet, I think it also comes with its fair share of challenges, just in terms of being safe online, but also being a concerned citizen online with and kind of fact checking information or being aware of what you read and just learning to take information and think it through before you actually act on it. And that's a skill that I feel that I've developed primarily because of my screen usage as opposed to just daily conversations with other people. So I think that to sum up what like these rather incoherent stream of thoughts, three issues I think that are really relevant to this discussion is just how screens make us more or less productive as people, how screens help us educate ourselves not only about like vague subjects but also things that are happening around us, and how we can still continue to be conscious users of the information we get on the screen and keep ourselves safe and aware and informed at the same time using the internet and screens. Yeah.
Thank you, Sanjana. That was very, very informative again. And I think before we move on to our next speaker part, if I could just interject here, I noticed that there's somewhat of a, I don't know if it's contrasting opinion or not, but you said that screens can aid and rather than hamper. But then we also had Akash talking about interactive learning and how it's really good because it's more visual based learning, so people can actually uh, concentrate and grasp concepts better. But then there was Sanjana who also said that it's sort of difficult to concentrate. It's sort of difficult to grasp something on a screen. It's more screens more aid rather than uh, being something that can replace, say, for example, traditional methods of teaching. So, and I, based on stories I've heard from my relatives, my friends, I know so many people who nowadays turn on their computers, mark their attendance, and then go back to bed because you don't have to actually concentrate in front of a computer screen if you're attending online classes or university lectures. So, if probably both you and Akash could just give your opinions about whether it's, do you agree with what Akash is say about visual learning being better, or do you think what Sanjana has to say makes more sense, or is it sort of a middle ground in which the two are just complementary? You do need some visual learning that you can get from a screen, but you also need something that's more traditional in form.
If I could, I entirely agree with what Sanjana said about the screen being an aid. And what Sanjit spoke about the people he knows who are just marking attendance and going back to sleep, that's very prevalent and it's going to keep happening. But I don't think the issue there is the screen. The issue there could also be the environment. For example, in when you come to a school setup, the environment of learning that's created is often what's more conducive to learning. So therefore, in a school setup, if you were to say use screens, you might be more likely to actually learn rather than if you're in the comfort of your home doing it from your bed all snuggled up in your blanket. And so I think that creating that environment is very necessary. And where the screens can come in is to help the different types of learners. Now, for example, I I enjoy studying from a textbook, but actually it gets very boring. A black and white textbook, no pictures, nothing, it's very difficult to concentrate. So what I find myself doing more and more is looking at YouTube videos of the same topic, and that those animations and the interactive portion of it, at least the interactive portion in the comment section, things like that, those are more energizing and those help me learn better. So having a combination of the two, where you have people that have to go through both forms because everyone's learning style is different, and a screen can be the sort of conduit or the pipeline to allow you to incorporate more types of learning, because it's very difficult for a teacher to make things very visual all the time, right? And on a screen, it's slightly easier. And therefore, as Sanjana said, a screen could be an aid to traditional forms of learning, and it could be incorporated more to help people with different learning styles perform better.
Right. And Sanjana, would you like to add something?
Yep. If I can just add to what Akash said really quickly and also address Sanjit's question, I don't think it's a binary. I don't think it's screens help learning or screens don't help learning. And at the same time, I also don't think there's a definite answer. I think this answer is highly personal, depending on, as Akash said, the environment you come from and the circumstances that you're accessing the screen in, but also the way in which you use these screens. And I think as someone who's been on both sides of a screen, I started out college this year online. I think that learning online has been significantly harder in some ways. So, for example, it's a lot harder to just pay attention to a lecture on a screen because it's just so easy to switch off. I'm someone who really needs like to be in a classroom because then like sitting under the nose of a teacher to pay attention. And in school, I usually like try and sit in the middle of class because I know that forces me to pay attention and not switch off. But I don't have that kind of connection on the screen, right? And you also can't have these kinds of conversations outside of the classroom or like hanging back after class to discuss with your professor that you normally have in an in-person kind of environment. So I think in that regard, it takes away a little bit from the just the interactions that you have in person, because I'm someone who learns not only from maybe what the teacher is telling me, but I also do large parts of my learning with just by just interacting with my peers. That's something that I don't have in like an online university. On the other hand, I do think that just education moving online in general has done wonders for accessibility, because I can now, for example, take online courses that a university outside of India is offering, and those are courses that I might not have like in my own university in India. At the same time, we also need to know that like not everyone has a stable enough internet connection to just sit through a 1.5 hour lecture. I am sitting in Bangalore, and even my internet sometimes gives out midway through class, and I miss bits of what's going on. So I think that's another thing that can both aid your education if you're looking at accessing courses that you may not physically have been able to access otherwise, but also in terms of just, I think the amount of information that I'm absorbing from each online class is a lot less. The other thing I would say is maybe in terms of teaching, although I have like very limited experience teaching stuff online, it's just really hard to know when students are paying attention, when students are picking up on what you're saying, because you don't have access to like the facial cues, the head nods, or like the blank stares that you otherwise would have to know how well your class is keeping up. Again, I'm not a teacher, but this is just stuff I've seen from my limited experience. Um, so in that regard, I think this answer is highly personal. If you are a visual learner, as Akash has said, I think the screen can do wonders for you. You have YouTube videos, you have apps like Notion that make note taking so much easier. You can use flashcards online, you can use online quizzes. All of those things, I think, are tools that can really help you when they're used side by side with traditional education. But I don't think that you take away the same from just an online lecture as opposed to an in-person lecture. Um, and I think that's what my experience has been. Like I said, this is probably different for different people.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Really fair points. And I think it's really circumstantial. It depends from one circumstance to another. Right. So before we move on to Parth, sorry, once again, I request people to put their questions in the Q&A box. We already have a couple coming through. Really looking forward to answering them in due time. But please do keep sending us more. We'd love to take more questions on. Right. And now over to you, Parth.
Thank you, Sanjay. So I really loved what Akash and Sanjana spoke about education and how screens can aid in helping education. But there's another aspect that I'd like to stress upon, and that's about communities. While, of course, screens can't substitute the in-person communities we have, they open, I feel, this really unique avenue to forming communities with like-minded people all over the world. We're no longer limited by geographical limitations, right? So for example, I'm really interested in space and space travel. And many of you may know that SpaceX is currently the leading provider and creator in this entire field. And I've seen people watching live streams of just SpaceX doing test launches or YouTubers talking about it, and hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of people from all corners of the world, where there's this incredibly informative and supportive forums where you can learn from each other and find so many people who have similar passions as you. Of course, on the other hand, you could find communities which are detrimental to yourself, to your mental state and so on online. So there is the importance of finding the right communities. But when you do, it can really help you follow and go ahead with your passions and what you're interested in, right? And another thing that I'd like to talk about a little later would be coming from someone who has extremely high power, a few myths about how screens are actually bad for our eyes, wherein a lot of adults and people in generations above us say, like tell children that don't be allowed a certain X number of hours of screen time, because after that, your eyes are going to get spoiled or so on. But in reality, it's not as simple as that. And there are multiple ways in which just following that on its own is not going to help you. And another thing that I felt was really pertinent to this topic and extremely dangerous in some ways would be the passive manipulation of screens. Now, manipulation is a really strong word, but when we look at the way the entire ecosystem of tech companies, of providers is built up, they're incentivized to manipulate the consumers, us, to do certain things with our screens. Now, understanding what this manipulation is and how it affects us would be really important in being able to manage how we use our screen time. And again, tying back to the point about how not all screen time is equal. And because a lot of this manipulation of our use of screen is something that we're not aware of in our day-to-day usage, and in certain ways it affects how we think, how we behave, and how we spend time in our screen. Just understanding that would really help us be able to use screens to the best of our abilities without being subjugated to too many negative aspects.
Parth, if I may just interject here, because you brought up the idea of screens being passive manipulators. And I just saw a question, the last one, which was about screens reducing the user's attention span. And this is something I wanted to address because this is one of the ways that certain facets of the screen affect the human body with regards to behavior and temperament. So, as I'm sure you all are aware, there is an increase in the short form content that people consume. So short form content is content that is a couple minutes, maybe a couple of seconds. And we had that entire boom of TikTok that happened over the course of quarantine. I mean, not for us anymore, but Instagram Reels has taken over. And this short form content, so how all content operates is based on a payoff model where you build up the user's expectations or the audience's expectations, and you give them something that they're waiting for. So in some terms, this is called the climax of a movie, it's called the punchline of a joke, so on and so forth. Now, in short form content, the payoff comes very quick. Sometimes you have Instagram Reels that are only for 10 seconds, 15 seconds. So when you get this payoff, there's a dopamine hit that triggers in your brain, and you want more of this, and you want it faster, you want it better, and therefore an increased usage or increased exposure to short form content does in fact lower someone's attention span, because when you're used to this quick payoff model, then the longer ones don't appeal to you anymore. So I know people now who only watch Instagram Reels. They can't sit through a YouTube video. A 6-minute YouTube video is suddenly too long. And that was when YouTube came out, we had the same feeling about documentaries and movies. And therefore, understanding these things is very important for users, because when you don't understand what something is doing to your body, and you keep doing this sort of thing, then it's negatively impacting you. Like, for example, reducing your attention span. Secondly, another thing I want to speak about is the compulsive tick that your mobile phones give you. Now, over the course of these previous half an hour, I'm sure many of you, myself included, have had our mobiles facing down, and suddenly we've just picked them up, opened them out, and just swiped aimlessly through the screens of applications, swiped down, seen the notifications. And on average, people tend to do this a couple hundred times every day. A couple hundred. Imagine that. You're just taking it out, looking at it, nothing to see, putting it back in. Another 5 minutes pass by, you take it out. And this sort of jittery behavior that you're craving, that either the social validation or the dopamine that your mobile phone is giving you, is detracting from your ability to concentrate on things and get into this state of what is known as deep work, where uninterrupted you can tackle an activity, and you can get meaningful creative work done. And therefore, understanding these sort of things that your phone or your screens are doing to you helps you I don't want to use the word limit, because limit makes it seem like it's enforced, but it helps you realize why using your screens in a particular way is not good for you to large extents of time. Now, I'm not saying stop looking at your notifications or stop watching Instagram Reels, but what I'm saying is understand what it's doing to you. So if you want to limit it because you don't want something like a shorter attention span to happen to you, you have the knowledge and therefore the motivation to do something like that.
Yeah, Akash, I really like what you said about the shorter attention span idea, right? And then we have to also ask ourselves, why do social media companies, for example, Instagram, create this format in the first place? So there's this really interesting concept that if the service is free, then you become the product, right? So here, when Instagram, for example, is a free app for anyone to use, and then you ask yourself, what is the company getting out of this? How are they making money? What's their business model? And what happens here is that their users, us, become the product, and our time is what they sell to advertisers, right? So we're no longer their consumer, but we're the people being used, and our time is being used. So when they create the short form content, it's directly aimed at grabbing our attention for those quick seconds to stay on their platform for longer and longer periods of time, and thereby increase their revenue, right? And recognizing that would be a really important step in being able to overcome, to some extent, being excessively manipulated by getting hooked on to continuously looking at the short form content. Whereas, of course, some amount of looking at it and all is fine, but realizing that exposing yourself to long form content, be it books, be it documentaries and so on, would help balance that, and ensure you have this regulation by yourself to be able to expose to both and not be put in a certain state, like where Akash said, where you can only at this point be engaged by the short form content being provided to you.
Right, and if I could just interject here and ask a question, which I think is sort of related to the previous three speeches, but the entire panel, please feel free to answer it. See, Sanjana spoke about how there's this change in content being moved from like nuanced discourse to short stuff. And then we had the following speakers also talk about short form content. So my question to you is this necessarily bad? Because the way you've portrayed it so far, you're making it sound as if it's really it's not a great thing, and tech companies are stealing your data. I mean, not only your data, they're stealing your time. That time is money for them, so it's good for them, and they're benefiting out of it. But they are benefiting out of it. But is it actually bad? Because let me just give you an example. I follow a lot of pages which give me news about current affairs or general knowledge or history. And while I may not be able to go through possibly even an entire Wikipedia page on a certain topic, if someone can post on Instagram, say 5 pictures with very brief content about what, for example, recently the farm bills that were, there were a lot of protests for that. I was not really aware of what the farm bills were about until I got information about it through some Instagram pages that summarized the entire agitation, both sides of the story, etc. And that probably to a certain extent prompted me to read more about that topic because I had a basic understanding of that topic. So is short form content really as bad as our panel is describing it to be today?
If I could here, I don't think short form content is bad in any way. Now, for example, you spoke about getting information about the farm bills. You get short form videos where you have recipes, you have fitness advice, all of that stuff. And it's a very good way to get information in a really short amount of time, because some people don't have enough time to go through the long form content. I think where the issue comes in is an over dependence on short form content, where you can only consume short form content and long form content you can't consume. And it may not be a bad thing for you if you only want to consume short form content, but understanding what it's doing to you is important. So short form content is very, very beneficial. I think the reach of short form content is a lot more because people aren't as scared of watching a 30-second video as they are a 1-hour documentary. And there's less time at risk for them. And therefore, short form content can be utilized very, very well. And it is by a lot of companies. But just understanding that, as Parth said, you have to balance it out in some way if you want to continue consuming long form content. if you want to maintain that ability, then I think you have to balance it and understand what the short form content is doing to you.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying, Akash. And the reason I think also most of us would like to have the ability to be able to consume the long form content when we want is because when you're trying to truly learn something at a deep level, the short form content might give you an introduction to it, but to truly understand what's happening, to further it, to use it perhaps in your life, or learn something from it for your education, for your career, whatever it may be, you need access to that long form content, be it reading longer articles or watching, like you said, a documentary. And in our lives, ultimately, we have to keep learning and keep growing as we go through life, right? So I feel like, at least for most people, if you lose this ability to engage with long form content when you want to, with the long form content that you need, then that might become an issue, right? Because it could be a time that, oh, okay, I want to learn something more about this topic, but because I'm so dependent on short form content, the moment I start reading past the second page, I lose interest and I don't know how to keep on reading this anymore. And I think that's the point at which only short form content starts to become an issue.
Um, if I can just add something here. So I essentially think that the question should really be, is short form content really bad? And then the follow up question should be, is it bad for whom? Because I like Akash and Parth have really valid points just in terms of, if you have 100 things on your Instagram feed, if each of those 100 things is just a 6 second or a 10 second or 30 second Instagram reel, you're more likely to read more of those 100 things as opposed to if they were all like 2 page long economist articles, in which case you'd probably get through only 2 or 3 of them. So I think what short form content does is it gives you breadth. But I do think that short form content has had significant negative impacts even when you go ahead and like actively seek out long form content to balance it, just in terms of the way content is now being presented. I think that when you have a screen like an Instagram explore page or a YouTube explore page or whatever, there's a lot of different links that are essentially vying for your attention. And all of them have to be short form, like kinds of content, because that's what people want to watch now. That's what our attention spans and our just the time at hand that we have is limiting us to. And I think what then happens is, just as a company, as a content creator, your incentive is just to get as many clicks as possible and to grab people's attention. And what you then start doing is doing things like sensationalization, having clickbaity titles, having clickbaity thumbnail images on your YouTube videos. And the problem with that is that it manipulates people, as Parth said, and it also promotes rampant misinformation, because a lot of times you might have like a really clickbaity YouTube video title, or you might have a really clickbaity initial Instagram like slide on your post, and people may not take the effort to swipe through and actually understand that the title was sensationalized or exaggerated, and they walk away with that initial opinion that you have. So I just think that short form content can never really give you any meaningful breadth. Like, while it makes you aware of things, it's you I think that you need nuance for any of that information to be meaningful enough for you to form an informed opinion. Because I think that any opinion that you form based off of like an Instagram post is only going to show you one side of the story, just because of the restrictions of the format that you have. Like, if you're doing an Instagram post with multiple slides, you still only have 10 slides, and out of those 10 slides you can't have images covering the entire slide because nobody's going to read that. So then how do you decide in those like maybe 50 words that you have how much space you allot to each side of the story, even for like news sources and information sources that claim to represent both sides of the story? They're going to have to like prioritize or compensate somewhere. They're going to have to put one over the other. And typically what they will prioritize is things that are sensationalized, that are that are designed to kind of aggravate you, that are designed to provoke a response, a like, a share, a retweet. And I think that is where the problem with short form content lies, because people think that, okay, I've read this Instagram primer. I've read this and now I'm well informed, right? I think it's a misnomer that most people are good faith will recognize that short form is not good enough content and will actively seek out long form, both because individuals just don't have the time and don't have the incentive, right? Like a lot of us sitting in our houses in Bangalore maybe don't have the incentive to really read up articles and think pieces about the farmer protests, about protests happening elsewhere. So I think that either with good or bad intentions, people just don't read beyond short form. And so the opinions that they tend to have are just these kind of manipulated, sensationalized kind of news and information that they get, which is why I think there's a problem with short form, even at an individual level as well as at a cultural level.
Yeah, Sanjna, what you said about clickbait and misinformation, I think one of the attendees also raised a question regarding that. And yeah, that's an extremely important danger about short form content. But I feel like one way which you can tackle this to some extent is knowing the sources you're following, right? So the types of pages you're following, what their political affiliations might be, or what their if they're leaning towards a certain direction. Because when you know that and you follow a range of sources or a range of um, pages that might give you opinions from different perspectives, using that, you'll be able to realize that the short form content you're getting from one source is not the absolute story. Because like you're saying, within that one post, they're really incentivized to put up a big number, maybe a 90% people do something, right? Because it's that one big statistic that suddenly draws people in, and that's the limited space you have in short form content. Whereas in a longer article, you can see and understand what that 90% actually means. And very often it turns out not to be what you assume at the first glance, right? And I've noticed that even with longer articles, when you read just the headline and the subtitle, you get a certain impression of it, right? But only when you read the article do you realize that there's a lot more to the story than what you got at first. And short form content essentially is just giving you that headline and that subtitle. And that on its own, from the same side of sources, could really give you a misinformed view and lead to exactly what you were talking about.
Thank you, Pat. I think Rashi was about to say something as well.
Yeah, thank you, Sanjit. Uh, I think I'm a lot more liberal about screen time in social media and short form content in general, just because I feel like it's really on the like it's really the duty of the first of all the social media companies or whatever to like make sure that you're not, as we just saw, Twitter banning Trump and stuff like that, which should have come a long time before. Or they should have, made sure that people were aware that the things that he was tweeting over the course of his 4-year presidency weren't actually fact. But I also know that social media companies are the ones who, are basically trying to like Parth said that you have to like look at both sides, or even Sanjana said you have to look at both sides of the story. But social media companies are looking at, like, they do monitor your algorithmic activity, and so they do know, if you're supporting one thing, and then they flood your feed with that, or if you're not supporting something, they flood your feed with that, and sort of in that way control what you see or what you don't see. But I also think that, as with short form content, as with anything in the world, there are pros and cons, and it's up to you as a user to decide whether it works for you, whether it's adding to your life, whether you are being informed or just, being hyped or manipulated to think a certain way or think against a certain thing. So balance is always necessary, I feel, in how we view screens and social media.
Absolutely. I think at the end of the day, and this is a theme I've been noticing through the conversation so far, it's it's two sides of a coin. Everything, technology. I mean, screens are good, bad. Short form content, good. It does you do like Sanjana rightly put it. You get more breadth, but probably your depth is less. Depth is less. So it really it boils down to just figuring out where you have to understand that what you're doing is probably wrong or right, and push yourself a little more to learn more about a particular topic. Right. So this is a question that's sort of open to all panelists, and it's based on what Parth said about screens and screen time. Rather, screens not really being bad for our eyes, which is something that was interesting, probably a bit controversial, especially to those parents on this webinar. So, uh, what do the other panelists think? Because if you personally ask me, based on what I've been reading, if based on what I've been reading, is that in the last decade or two, doctors have been saying that the number of children between the age of 13 to 16 who are getting glasses because of bad eyes has actually doubled, and that can pretty closely be associated with the rise in the usage of screens as well, and which is what our topic is all about here. Screen, there is screen, a screen everywhere in the last decade or two. So this is a question not only to Path, but to the other panelists as well. Briefly, what do you think about this?
Right. So, um, well, I feel like screen time on its own is not the issue, right? So when an adult puts a limit to maybe 2 hours a day or 3 hours a day or whatever that limit may be, that alone isn't going to solve this inherent problem of hurting your eyes or something like that, right? Because it's a lot more important about how you use that screen and how it impacts your eyes. Because in certain ways, 1 hour of screen time in a bad manner, which I'll just come to in a second, could be as bad as 5 hours of screen time used effectively and used better, right? So it's just like a certain important few things to keep in mind. And most important of them would be eye strain. So what happens quite often when we're using a screen is that we don't blink. And because of that, when we keep staring at the screen continuously, that's what creates eye fatigue and can be detrimental to our eyesight as well, right? So there are ways to overcome this. So for example, there are certain applications that black out your screen for 5 seconds every 10 minutes. And during those 5 seconds, it gives you a prompt to just make sure you look to the distance and make sure you're blinking your eyes as well. And just taking certain measures like that, also ensuring that you have an adequate distance from your screen. And those two, I guess, are the most important things that really help you reduce the damage that screen time can do to your eyes. And following those, a lot more hours of screen time, which we do currently use, would not be as bad as even 1 hour of screen time, but not used properly.
Right. Anyone else? Rashi, Akash, Sanjana.
Sanjana, do you want to?
Yeah, I just had a
Yeah.
quick point. So, thanks, Akash. So I think that with respect to like screens and health in general, I'm not like super aware about eye strain in particular, but I think it largely depends on the habits you form and how those habits correlate with your usage of the screen. Because for me, a big problem that I observed was just with my online classes, just having neck and back pain because of my posture. And so I think it takes you to be, it's on you to be aware of that and then cultivate habits accordingly to kind of alleviate those problems. So I've bought myself a laptop stand. I keep the laptop at like a particular inclination. I now make sure I'm always using my laptop on a desk with a straight back chair. So I'm consciously aware of my posture at all times. So I think that maybe screens, while they have some medical like side effects, I think you can manage those and kind of mitigate those harmful effects if you cultivate good habits around the ways in which you use them. Maybe put a blue light filter or reduce the brightness of your screen. Make sure you're using good posture, maintaining good posture while using the screen. Stuff like that can essentially help you out.
If I
And I
could
think,
just, yeah, Sanjana, please.
yeah, sorry. So just before Akash takes the floor, I think we got a very interesting comment in our Q&A box, which said that regarding more kids getting glasses now due to screen usage, you'd be surprised that the same thing happened when man started reading books, which is, I think, a very interesting comment. Thank you so much for that. and something that sort of puts things into context as well, because today we have parents telling us, stop using your screen so much, except if it's your Zoom online classes, but please start reading more books instead of looking at your screen all day, which is, I think, a really good comeback that I'm going to keep in mind for the years to come, probably. Yes, Akash.
Yeah, thank you. Now, regarding this entire thing about eye strain, and yeah, eye dryness does happen quite a bit when you don't blink because you're more engrossed. So generally, you blink about 15 to 17 times a minute as per study. And when you're looking at a screen, that comes down to almost five. Now, there was another question we got regarding, which I think is linked to this, regarding how kids our age or slightly younger than us can do these things. And so, for example, even when Sanjana took the effort of getting a laptop stand and all of that to help her health, a lot of us might not think the same way. There's because the human body has a tendency to use the path of least resistance. So whatever's easiest for us to do, will generally tend to do that. So, for example, if you tell someone, oh, the screen is bad for your eyes, look away every 20 minutes and you don't sort of make that the easiest thing to do, it's very unlikely that they will do it. So, using things like what Parth said, the application where every 10 minutes it just clears out your screen, completely dark. So, you don't have a choice because that then becomes the easiest thing to do. The easiest thing to do then is to just blink because it's a black screen. In the same way, you need to set yourself limits for the content you consume or the ways you use your screen. And these only work when you make it the easiest thing to do. So, for example, if you find yourselves more likely using your phone in the morning just as you wake up, keep your phone away, maybe in another room, and get a book or whatever you want to do. I'm not preaching reading or something, but whenever you want to be able to make a change, especially with regards to screens, you have to make whatever you want to do very, very easy. You have to add friction to stop yourselves from doing something that is not good. So, for example, I used to use my phone, like when you have your alarm, you switch it off, you scroll through your phone in bed. So to combat that, I put my phone on my desk. So now I have to walk all the way to turn off the alarm. And by that point, I'm already awake. So those are the sort of things that you have to add friction. And in that way, you'll be able to combat these. And moreover, with things like your laptop stand or something, if it's attached to your laptop, it's just easier to use. Get a higher chair, things like that. So there are ways that you can sort of help yourself minimize the effect, the detrimental health impact that screens have. And in order to ensure that they work, you have to make those the easiest thing to do.
So my point was actually going to be what Priya Rao just said, that, it like people say that, oh yeah, screen time ruins your eyes. And I'm usually the one who says, like when this discussion comes up, I'm the one who says, it depends on what you're looking at on your screen. And they say, you have glasses. You should know. No, these glasses I got because I read in really, really dark places and with low light. So yeah, but I do think, like, one way that I work on managing the effects of like using screens constantly on like my eyes or like on my health is things like, I don't know, on when you get glass frames, you can actually have them coated with like, UV resistant or blue light resistant film, which basically makes it easier on your eyes, so your eyes don't get strained too much. What I do on my phone is I don't constantly look at moving things, or like, because the strain on your eyes is caused by things that flicker or things that constantly move. And so I do tend to like do things like read an article or read anything, but something that doesn't make it like move. That's why things like e-readers became popular, because you needed a screen that didn't have anything that flickered on it, or didn't have anything that was causing anything that you could like get distracted by. So things like that, I think, will sort of make it easier. But just like with anything, there is always going to be some sort of physical effect on like your health. But I don't think that makes it bad. I just think that that's something that we have to like learn to work with, or learn how to protect ourselves against, and evolve other various tools to be able to help with that.
This idea of flicker that Rashi were talking about is really interesting and ties back also to our previous discussion about short form content, because quite often like different apps or media companies might use something that's really attention grabbing, something that pops out to draw attention to that. So it's really a balance that you have to be able to find between making sure you're not seeing too many things happening at once, jumping at you from your screen, where a lot of sources are trying to do that. Also, another thing that I would like to add about blue light is that at least like current studies from numerous sources show that the most harmful part about blue light, more than just like eye strain, which you can mitigate through, as you're saying, like filters for your glasses or certain screen guards which give you blue light protection, would be to do with your sleep cycle. So the part where it actually harms our brains the most is right at night. Again, not for all people, depends on your system. At night, if you're seeing excessive amounts of screen, that manipulates your brain into not sending out certain hormones which make it easier to start sleeping. And because of that, you get into the cycle where using a device at night makes you be able to sleep less or get disturbed sleep and so on. So that's just like one of the bigger dangers than simply just saying that like many adults tell us that, oh, your eyes are going to get spoiled if you keep looking at screens. It's realizing you're ensuring that your sleep cycle is working out even while using devices.
Right. So thank you for that. The past hour has gone by quite quickly, and I think if we had a longer time slot given to us, we could have gone on and on talking about this for the next couple of hours, probably. But sadly, we have to move on to the Q&A session because we have a lot of questions coming our way, and let's begin with question number one, not addressed to anyone in particular. How do you teach people around you how to use screens safely to ensure that they have a fulfilling lifestyle?
Um, if I could, now I think that's a very, very valid question. And at least from my experience, I found that if any change in your lifestyle is to be sustained, it has to be a change that comes from within. Like you have to want to change for the change to be. And in that regard, all you can do is draw people's attention to certain information, and they'll understand it for themselves and they can make changes. For example, a couple of months ago, there was this very interesting documentary that I'm sure many of you seen called The Social Dilemma. And for a number of people, it made them realize how these sort of screens and how social media companies affect our lives, and how these are built to grab your attention and to maintain your attention. So, firstly, by helping them understand that there is an issue through documentaries like that, through discussions like these, and then helping point them to sources where they can get certain solutions from. So, for example, getting blue light lenses, or using apps that blank out your screen, or getting a laptop stand, things like that. So once someone wants to make a change, I think they themselves seek sources to help facilitate that change, and they themselves look at ways to help realize that change. So I think the best thing we can do is help make people aware and point their attention to the ways that these screens are affecting us.
If I can jump, sorry, Rashi, go ahead.
Okay, I was actually I'm going to take a slightly different stance from Akash, because I think that um, when you look at this is also something that I had going through my head when Sanjana was making her earlier point about productivity and stuff like that. But to me, it's like, why does our entire, like, why do we constantly have to be productive? Why is it constantly, why does something always have to come out of it? Why can't it just be a leisurely thing to use? Even with the social dilemma, and people got really scared about, um oh no, what does this mean, what are the ramifications? I think that if you really want to help people around you lead a fulfilling life, you just have to like explain to them that social media is a tool at the end of the day. Any screen, anything that you use in your life is a tool, because if we didn't have our phones or our laptops, if we were sitting at like a table, and like, what would we do? We would be reading, we would be looking through encyclopedias, we would be outside playing. These are all just things that are, sort of complementing, or in a way substituting those sorts of things. And it's not always about, being productive or needing to get something out of it. It can just be that you just know that this device or this screen is not the be all end all. The information that I see is not the be all end all. And I can just, I can consume this information without making it part of my identity, or part of, how I see the world, or part of my personality. So I think that it's important to take a step back, and like, when we think about dependence on social media, it shouldn't be dependence in the sense that, oh, I have to post today, or like, or I didn't get enough likes on my picture, so now I have to like delete it, or I don't have enough friends, or like I need to get more followers. It shouldn't become that. So that's how I think that you just have to like encourage people around you to take a step back, and not invest so much of themselves in it. Just see it as what it is, a tool, and it can either help you, or it can like make it worse. It's up to you.
Yeah, if I can just add to what both Rashi and Akash said, I think it's a really valid point that we don't always have to be productive. And I think one of the biggest myths surrounding screen time is that there's a binary between screens and grades or screens and studying. And obviously, I can talk a lot about how screens help me study in terms of taking notes and like Quizlet and flashcards and all of that. But I also think that even what most people would consider time pass, social media usage, or like wasting time on a screen is not a waste of time, because even when I'm just talking to my friends on WhatsApp, or like looking at memes on Instagram, that's still, I think, personally really vital to my emotional and mental well-being. If I was always just studying and being productive and like reading like think pieces on my screen 24/7, I'd be a really boring, sad person. And I honestly think that, especially in times like these, you need these kind of light-hearted memes, or like just chilling out on your phone with your friends, or sending each other memes to kind of keep you happy. I don't think it's completely terrible to do that. That being said, I also think that there is sometimes a tendency for these devices to take over our lives, and I think there's two really big ways to solve that. One, I think, is just, as Akash said, awareness. I think the moment you're aware of how screens change things, both in terms of giving you misinformation or in terms of getting you hooked to it, you're then going to be able to take conscious steps to reverse that bias. And at the moment you're aware that what you're reading is biased, you're also likely to like have that voice at the back of your head telling you to be wary of what you're reading and what you're using and the way in which you're consuming information. The second thing is that I really, really think that the answer to spending too much time on your screen and not focusing on studies or whatever is not to externally enforce a restriction. So, not to have your parents take away your devices at a particular time in the night, because I just think that doesn't teach you to have a good relationship with the device, and that doesn't teach you the sense of responsibility that you need, because at some point that accountability is going to go away. You won't always have somebody taking away your device from you, and then the moment you're left alone with that device, you'll go haywire. I think the way you learn to manage your screen time or this social media time is just by making a mistake and then learning that, okay, we should not let it get this far, right? At one point, you're going to have realized that, oh, it's 11 p.m. I have a paper due at 12. I've spent the entire day scrolling through Instagram, and then pull an all-nighter to finish that paper. And at the end of that, you're going to feel horrible and realize that the root cause of all your problems was that screen time. And then you're likely to do things like set app time limits or download a productivity app like Forest, which I really recommend to keep yourself on track. So I really think self-regulation is the answer as opposed to like external punishments or like rewards to motivate yourself.
Right, I think that's really good advice. And like we've been talking about this at the IC as well, our Q&A sessions with in the young adult series often becomes a counseling session in which 70 to 22-year-olds are telling parents what they should do with their children, what we recommend, what we think is best. And we do have a question. We have a couple of questions on that front as well. What advice do you have for a parent of a 12-year-old girl to motivate her to balance her time being key, between screen, playing outside, reading, or doing other non-screen activity at home? And I'd probably add, should we even be recommending something, or should it be left to a particular person? Because we have already spoken about how screen time and screen usage is not necessarily uh, and inherently a bad thing always.
Well, I
Yes.
think that, okay, yeah, if I may, I think that it's definitely important, especially at younger ages, for parents to give more guidance to their children about managing between screen and non-screen. Because as you get older, like Sanjana was saying, you have this ability to self-regulate and understand more about the world. But especially as a younger child, it's definitely important for a parent to help the child understand rather than just putting arbitrary restrictions, because then the child doesn't understand why it's happening and therefore would not be open to it. And about how to motivate a child to do other non-screen activities, I would say for me, it would be about encouraging them to find and do things that are non-screen that they really enjoy and really like doing. Because then that becomes, as Akash was saying previously, a path of least resistance. So it might be going to play football, it might be reading a book, but whatever it might be, finding something that the child enjoys a lot would help them by themselves also spend time on that non-screen activity, and encouraging them to do that would help them be able to balance both of these aspects.
Thank you, Parth. Yeah, that's true. Okay, moving on to the next question. It's to do with our sort of extended discussion on short form content. So I totally understand how it is easy to consume news when it is in short form, but wouldn't it be easy for content creators to misguide their consumers politically by subtly changing facts and misrepresenting information? I think we did speak a fair amount of this, and I think the panel is borderless in consensus um, when we say that there is it is what the person is asking is true. There is a lot of bias. The person also added that I've personally seen the rise in political bias and content is presented, which is absolutely true. But like we said, you get more breadth. Probably your depth isn't good, and because of that, your opinions may also be wrong. Right. So moving on to the next question. Again, a counseling question, as I call it, on the issue of keeping yourself able to get back to concentrating on the long form content. Can you folks suggest some way in which 15 to 18-year-olds can do that?
Can I go? Yeah, so I actually had this problem quite recently, and the way I got over, I didn't even realize, I think, for a while how hooked onto short form content I'd gotten until I looked at when like quarantine started, and I looked at the number of books that I had read over the past 2 years, and realized that I had read very, very, very little of them. So I think the way you go back to reading long form is, or consuming any kind of long form content, is just picking one form that you really, really like, and then setting like small goals for yourself to do that. So I love reading. And so I set a goal for myself. I had a book list of really well recommended books that loads of people had told me to read. And I said, okay, I'm just going to try and see how many of these I can read in 1 month or 2 months. I know there are reading challenges online where you have communities of people that motivate you to finish reading a book or finish like watching a docu series or whatever within that amount of time. So I would say find a long form type that you really like, whether that's books or movies or just longer articles. Get like a community of people to support you through that who are also doing the similar thing. You can find communities online, you can start a challenge with your friends itself, or you can even do it with your academic group and then just motivate each other through that process. But the key is to do it with something you're already interested in rather than reading something you don't like.
To add, the way I deal with like people who like struggle with going back to long form content after like being so bombarded with short form content is that I usually recommend like doing it in pieces. Like everyone thinks that, oh, if I have to now consume anything that's long form, then I have to sit down and do it all in one sitting. But no, you can easily watch a documentary over like a week. You can easily read a book over a week, and it doesn't really matter because you're still going to consume that same amount of information. It's just the duration of time that you're investing in it that changes. And I think a lot of people have a little bit of shame attached to taking a while to like read a book or watch a documentary. But I think that it's fine, like you just equate that time to watching a bunch of like short form content things in like the same span of time and gleaning the same sort of information and knowledge. So that's how I would recommend it.
Right. So we have a very interesting question, again addressed to all. What are the policy implications of technology being two-sided? I think it's a very broad question. It can be debated for very long. And due to the paucity of time, if any one of you could just react to it for 30 seconds to a minute.
If no one
Sanjana
else,
first.
yeah, if no one else wants to, uh, my take on this is um, that I'm not qualified to answer this question because this is, I think, a question that I've had several times as well. I don't think I think there are some issues in tech that are pretty clear on things we need to take a stand on, things like greater protection for user data and privacy. And those are things that, while I think there's a clear this side is right, it's still really hard to legislate on those issues. But given that most issues, like the question says, are two sided, I don't think there's a clear answer that we have. I think ultimately you should have a choice at an individual level how you want things like your data to be used. So things like opting into cookies or opting into websites collecting data are solutions I see to kind of let each user pick their own side.
Right, thank you. So, since we are at the end of our scheduled time, I'll take the liberty of just taking probably around 2 minutes to just quickly go through the questions and comments. What about students who are coding non-stop? I have a request from Akash to let him answer this, so please do go ahead, Akash. But
Um,
let's keep it short and respect people.
Yeah. So when it comes to coding nonstop, because I do a decent amount of computer programming, I think there's sort of a misrepresentation in media. You imagine this hacker sort of person wearing a hoodie, just typing away and things just appear. That's not exactly how it works. Most of the time, you're stuck with understanding why this 10-line piece of code isn't working. But the ways that you can sort of balance this out is I'm assuming this is with regards to screens and eye fatigue and things like that. So apart from what we've already discussed, blue light filters, all of that, is moving to ideating things on paper because that might be less strain. Then taking a couple minutes break every 20 minutes. Then again, I keep coming back to this, the app that makes your screen go dark, things like that. And there's an entire collection of things you can do. You can very easily find this online. And if you feel that you are getting tired or strained after coding, maybe pick better hours or shorter hours. And it's a very, very personal concept. So therefore, I don't want to recommend any generic stuff. But there's enough resources online if you feel any sort of fatigue from programming because of the screen that you can easily solve.
Right. So the remedies are more to do with how to make your eyes stay better, probably blink a little more, use better furniture at home or add-ons to your laptops in terms of hardware add-ons to just make it a little better because coding is something that's really important. If you do require it, but if you're doing it non-stop, you should probably look at some sort of remedies in this aspect rather than not doing it at all. Right, so let me quickly go through a couple of comments that we got. One that says we should not have that especially our generation should not have the burden of justifying increased screen time because we do have a teacher with us here who has said that because of the pandemic, all work has been moved online and screen time has gone up by a lot. So it's not really our burden to justify why our screen time is that high. This is just a comment from this person. Um, she also adds at the end, it's all a matter of just staying healthy through it, which I think is really well put and is what even we have been trying to say through our conversation today. Last but not the least, we do have a compliment for our panelists to say that apps that make screens go blank is a gem. So thank you for suggesting that, and I do hope that it does help a couple of people who need that app a lot. Right, so that brings us to the end of today's panel discussion, the Young Adult series at BIC. I thank my panelists for being here. I thank BIC for allowing us to do this. It's great to hear refreshing new voices. Most of us in this panel are, I think, below the age of 20, just 18, 19 years old, and we still have opinions. We still show the world, if not at least Bangalore, that the youth are the future. The youth have to have a platform, and it's great that all of you could make time to attend this discussion. So thank you so much, and have a great day ahead.
This has been quite the informed conversation, from content formats to increasing productivity to being able to appreciate small human interactions like eye contact and understanding nods of heads to actually offering advice. May I say how much of a pleasure it has been to listen to each of you. Thank you, Rashi, Sanjana, Pars, and Akash for your willingness to share and for spending this time with us. Of course, Sanjit for structuring and putting this together. Thank you, audiences, for joining us and engaging with this topic. Hope the conversation continues offline and on your various screens. Hope everyone has a lovely Sunday ahead. Thank you and see you next time.
Thank you.